My sister lied to get the will changed, but the lawyer was recording everything. It had only been a day since we buried our mother when my phone buzzed with Barbara's name. Not Barb, not Sis, just Barbara, like an alert from the IRS or an overdue bill. She never called unless she wanted something, and today she sounded almost cheerful. "Terence," she chirped, skipping any condolences, "we need to meet with Mr. Ellison. Tomorrow morning, 10 sharp. Mother left some updates." Updates. I knew that tone. She used the same one when she told me she was redecorating Dad's study and sold all his books to a collector without asking. "You sure you don't mean your updates?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. There was a pause, just long enough to confirm that she'd heard the bite, didn't appreciate it, but wouldn't rise to it. "Just be there." She hung up. I stared at my phone for a long second, then at the half-packed suitcase on the floor. I hadn't planned to stay in town more than a few days. Just long enough to handle the funeral, sign a few papers, and return to my apartment in Boston. Clean, quiet, forgettable. But now there were updates. Barbara had always been the type to show up late and still expect a parade. When we were kids, she had a talent for twisting every family rule to suit her. Curfew? She'd claim she was running errands for Mom. Chores? Somehow, she always had a mysterious stomachache whenever it was time to vacuum, and yet she was the one who stayed close to home. The good child with the perfect hair, the polished laugh, the crocodile tears. Mom knew better. She just didn't always say it out loud. The drive back to our hometown was exactly as I remembered it, long, flat, and filled with radio static. Somewhere around mile marker 42, I found myself rehearsing conversations with Barbara. Not productive ones, more like imaginary arguments that always ended with me slamming a door or her storming out in tears. It was ridiculous. I was a grown man, for God's sake, a reasonably successful one. I paid my bills on time, flossed, didn't shout in public, but one phone call from Barbara, and I was 13 again, defending myself over a broken lamp I didn't touch. I glanced at the dashboard clock. If I didn't hit traffic, I'd be in town by nightfall. The truth was, I hadn't been back in almost 2 years. The last visit was for Thanksgiving, a disaster involving a burned turkey, Barbara's third husband, and a political argument that nearly ended in mashed potatoes being weaponized. After that, Mom and I mostly talked over the phone. Quick, efficient, familiar. She was never sentimental, but she always remembered to ask if I was eating enough. She didn't talk about Barbara much, but I remember one call, maybe 6 months ago, when she said, "I'm making some arrangements, just in case. Ellison will know." I thought she meant her burial plot. Now, I wasn't so sure. My apartment in Boston is modern, minimal, and mostly beige. The house I grew up in, the opposite. It was a 2-story Victorian with a creaky porch, floral wallpaper, and a distinct smell of lemon polish mixed with old books. Driving past it that evening felt like staring at a paused memory. The curtains were drawn. The mailbox still had our family name painted on the side in fading gold letters, Warren. Barbara's car was already in the driveway. Of course it was. I parked across the street, shut off the engine, and sat in silence for a moment. The house looked smaller now, like the years had folded it in on itself. Or maybe I'd just outgrown the parts that once felt huge, the winding staircase, the clawfoot tub, the way Mom's voice echoed from the kitchen like it owned the place. She did own it. All of it. And now she was gone. I didn't cry at the funeral, not because I didn't care, but because it felt incomplete, like we were missing something. A final conversation, a last laugh, a real goodbye. Maybe Ellison had that. Maybe that's what this meeting was really about. I got out of the car, grabbed my bag, and took a deep breath. Whatever Barbara was playing at, she'd better be ready. Because I wasn't 13 anymore, and this time, I wasn't going to let her rewrite the ending. Mr. Ellison's office looked exactly the way you'd expect a small-town lawyer's office to look. Walls lined with thick leather, bound books, antique clocks ticking somewhere in the background, and the kind of heavy oak furniture that smelled like old money and polished grief. I stepped inside and was greeted by the scent of dust and lemon oil. Barbara was already there, of course. She sat primly in a high-backed chair like it was a throne, one leg crossed over the other, her lips pressed into a self-satisfied smirk. She wore black, tailored, expensive, strategic. Uncle Michael leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. I hadn't seen him since Mama's birthday 2 years ago, when he brought her a bottle of bourbon and made her laugh harder than I'd ever seen. He adored her. And then there was Cousin Jane, perched by the window like a crow in pearls. Jane had a gift for saying what everyone else was too polite to say, and then pretending it was just a joke. Terence, she nodded. You look tired. Life in Boston not agreeing with you? Nice to see you too, Jane. Mr. Ellison entered through a side door, carrying a thick folder and moving with the slow efficiency of someone who had absolutely no intention of rushing for anyone. Good morning, he said. His voice was dry, smooth, and polite, like sanded wood. Let's begin. We all settled into our places, the air so still I could hear the clock tick. Barbara cleared her throat. I'd like to say something first. Of course she would. I know this is difficult, she began, her tone dripping with false sympathy, but Mother and I had many long conversations before she passed. About her estate, her intentions, and she made changes. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a crisp envelope, which she placed gently on the table in front of her like a royal decree. This, she said, is the updated will, dated 6 months ago. Everything goes to me. The house, the accounts, the personal belongings. I was her caretaker after all. It's only fair. Uncle Michael let out a low whistle. Jane raised an eyebrow so high it nearly reached her hairline. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Barbara turned to Mr. Ellison. I assume you've reviewed it? Mr. Ellison didn't flinch. I have seen what you sent over. We'll get to that. But first, he said, placing his own folder on the table with a deliberate thud, we'll read the will I have on file, the official version currently registered and witnessed. Barbara opened her mouth, but Ellison held up one hand, not rudely, but with the weary authority of a man who'd spent 50 years wrangling entitled clients. If there's a valid new will, it will be reviewed after this one, but I suggest we take things in order. Barbara sat back, clearly irritated, but unwilling to challenge him directly. As Ellison began reading, I let my eyes drift across the room. I thought about the Christmas when Barbara got a pony, yes, an actual pony, and I got a science kit that leaked all over my bed sheets. Dad had clapped her on the back and called her his little lady. Meanwhile, Mom watched me mop up blue chemicals and said, at least you'll grow up knowing how to clean up other people's messes. She always saw Barbara clearly. She just didn't always say it out loud. Back in the present, Ellison's voice continued calmly. The estate shall be divided equally between my 2 children, Terence and Barbara Warren. Barbara's foot tapped silently under the table. Jane snuck a glance at her and smirked. Uncle Michael coughed, or maybe it was a laugh. Personal effects may be claimed in mutual agreement. The house may be sold or retained, if both parties agree. In the event of disagreement, the executor will appoint mediation. Straightforward, fair, exactly the kind of document our mother would write. Clean, logical, unambiguous. Barbara's lips were pressed so tight I thought they might disappear. When Ellison finished, he closed the folder and folded his hands. Barbara wasted no time. Yes, well, she said, her voice just a touch too bright. As I said, Mother changed her mind. She realized how much I did for her, how little Terence was around. She wanted to make things right. Jane snorted. Uncle Michael didn't bother hiding his grimace. Barbara slid the envelope across the table toward Ellison. This was signed and notarized. I have copies of the witness statements. Mr. Ellison nodded but didn't touch it. I'll need to review that separately, he said. For now, this meeting was scheduled to execute the official will. Barbara's eyes flashed. You can't just ignore. I'm not ignoring anything, he said, still calm. But as you well know, Barbara, we must verify the legitimacy of any revised documents thoroughly. There was a silence that stretched just a second too long. Then Ellison looked at me. Mr. Warren, do you have any objections to your mother's original instructions? No, I said simply. They sound exactly like her. Barbara scoffed. Of course you'd say that. You always thought she favored you. No, I said. I just listened to her. Ellison closed his folder. We'll reconvene once I've reviewed the additional document. Thank you all for coming. Barbara stood abruptly and stalked out of the office, her heels clicking like punctuation. Jane leaned in and whispered, Well, that was fun. Uncle Michael shook my hand. You okay? Yeah, I said. But something's off. Mom was smart. She wouldn't have changed her will without a reason. Michael nodded slowly. She was smarter than all of us, and as I watched Ellison collect the papers with precise movements, I had the sudden feeling that he knew something none of us did. Something he wasn't ready to say. Not yet. The wind outside Mr. Ellison's office had picked up, rattling the windows just enough to make the silence inside more noticeable. Barbara was gone, but her perfume still lingered like a warning. Mr. Ellison was reorganizing his files, slowly, methodically, like he had all the time in the world. But I didn't. Not really. I turned my gaze toward the bookshelf near his desk and let my mind drift. 2 weeks before she died, Mom asked me to meet her at that little cafe by the lake, the one she liked with the mismatched chairs and the waitresses who called everyone honey. It was a warm, overcast day, the kind that makes you think rain is coming but never actually does. She ordered her usual hot tea with lemon and a scone she barely touched. She looked smaller that day, not just physically, though she'd definitely lost weight, but like her edges had softened somehow, like the steel that always lived in her spine had settled into something quieter. We didn't talk about her illness. She hated talking about her body. Instead, she talked about the house, about the trees needing trimming, about the neighbor's dog who barked too much. And then, after a long pause, she looked straight at me and said, "If something happens to me, everything's taken care of." I didn't like how calm she sounded. "You don't have to talk like that," I told her. "You're doing better. The doctor said—" "Terence," she interrupted, gently but firmly, "I'm not afraid of dying, but I am afraid of what happens after." I didn't understand at first. I just nodded, confused. Then she leaned in, her voice lower. "I've made arrangements. I've left instructions. Ellison knows." "Instructions for what?" "For everything," she said, stirring her tea even though she'd stopped adding sugar years ago. "For the will. For the house. For you and Barbara." "Barbara?" I asked. "What about her?" She gave a dry little smile, the kind that said you already know the answer. "Just be ready," she said. "Your sister, she never liked to lose, and she doesn't believe no is a complete sentence." I laughed then. I thought she was being dramatic. But now, sitting in this office hearing Barbara declare herself the chosen one, I understood. Mom hadn't been joking. She'd been preparing me. I looked back at Mr. Ellison, who was calmly checking something on his computer. His brow furrowed slightly, as if something didn't quite sit right. He wasn't just some small-town paper pusher. He was a vault. And Mom had clearly trusted him with more than just signatures. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes drifting to the door Barbara had slammed on her way out. I could still see the faint smudge of her fingerprint on the glass. I should have stayed in town. That thought came uninvited, pressing into my ribs like guilt wrapped in barbed wire. I'd left because it was easier to be the son who called on Sundays than the one who dealt with real-life emergencies. Barbara always wanted the spotlight. I let her have it, thinking I was keeping the peace. But peace built on silence never lasts. If I'd stayed, maybe Mom would have felt safer. Maybe she wouldn't have had to whisper things in diners or hide plans in old law offices. I rubbed a hand over my face. Regret was a loud companion. It didn't wait for you to invite it in. "Mr. Warren," Ellison said, his voice cutting gently through my thoughts. "Is everything all right?" I looked up, just thinking. He nodded, almost knowingly. "Your mother was a very deliberate woman. She left very specific instructions. We'll review everything carefully." I hesitated. "Can I ask, did she ever mention—" "She mentioned Barbara," he said before I could finish. "She mentioned both of you, repeatedly." There was something in his tone. Not quite a warning, not quite reassurance. I nodded. "Thank you." He closed the folder in front of him and stood. "We'll be in touch once I've had a chance to authenticate what your sister submitted." He didn't say if, he said once, professional, measured, but I caught the flicker in his eye. He already knew something, maybe not everything, but enough. I stood, thanked him, and stepped outside into the wind. The sky was still holding its breath, no rain, just tension. As I walked to my car, I thought about that afternoon by the lake, about the way my mother looked at me, not like a son, but like someone she was handing a torch to. And somewhere deep down, I started to believe that the fire was still burning, waiting to be uncovered. By the time we reconvened in Mr. Ellison's office 2 days later, The air felt tighter, like the room knew something we didn't. The same thick curtains filtered the light into amber shadows, and the old grandfather clock ticked louder than I remembered. Barbara had already claimed the same seat near the head of the table, her posture a little too perfect, her smile a little too smug. She was dressed like a woman ready to win, navy blue blazer, pearl earrings, and the kind of expensive-looking folder that screamed prepared testimony. Mr. Ellison sat opposite her, calm as ever, though there was a certain weight in how he set down his folder this time, like it contained more than just paper. Uncle Michael and Jane arrived together and took the side chairs without a word. Michael gave me a short nod. Jane glanced at Barbara and muttered, "Let the games begin." Ellison cleared his throat. As discussed previously, he said, "We'll begin by reading the official last will and testament of your mother, Evelyn Warren, as filed and notarized 6 years ago." Barbara's lips pressed together. Her fingers tapped rhythmically against her folder. Ellison opened his file and began reading in a steady voice that echoed against the wooden paneling. "I, Evelyn Margaret Warren, being of sound mind and judgment, do declare this to be my last will and testament." I had never heard my mother's full name read aloud like that. It felt formal, distant, like she'd stepped out of our lives and into a history book. "I leave my estate, including but not limited to my home, all bank and investment accounts and personal belongings, to be divided equally between my children, Terence Michael Warren and Barbara Lynn Warren." There was a beat of silence. No gasps, no shouting, just the sound of a small victory dying in Barbara's throat. Then her voice, too sweet to be sincere, "Yes, well, that was before she changed her mind." Mr. Ellison didn't look up. "We'll get to that." "She did change it," Barbara said quickly, sliding her folder across the table. 6 months ago, she signed a new will. I have it right here." Ellison took the document and laid it flat. He didn't touch it right away. Barbara leaned forward. "She told me she wanted me to have everything. I was her caretaker, her companion. Terence was barely around." Uncle Michael snorted. Jane muttered, "Here we go." Ellison finally lifted the paper. He examined it quietly. His fingers traced the edge like he was feeling for something that wasn't visible. Then he looked at the signature. I leaned over slightly. Something was off. I couldn't quite name it, but it felt wrong. The curve of the E was too smooth. The spacing was tighter than usual. My mother had a firm hand. Neat, sure. This signature looked careful, practiced. Barbara must have noticed my expression because she snapped she signed it herself, in front of witnesses. Ellison didn't respond. He flipped through the pages, then placed the document gently beside the original. "I'll need time to authenticate this," he said. "It's notarized," Barbara said sharply. "As I said," Ellison replied, "calm as ever. I'll review it thoroughly." Barbara's nostrils flared. "You can't just ignore it." "I'm not, but you must understand. Any document claiming to override a registered will must be examined carefully, especially one submitted posthumously." Her jaw clenched. "Are you accusing me of something?" "No," he said. "I'm doing my job." The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. Uncle Michael leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "I think we'd all like to know why this wasn't mentioned earlier, Barbara. You waited until after the funeral to spring it on us." Barbara shot him a look. "It wasn't about timing. It's about what Mother wanted." Jane raised an eyebrow. "So why didn't she tell anyone else?" "She didn't trust Terence," Barbara said flatly. "She told me so." I didn't flinch. I just looked at Mr. Ellison. "Would you know if my mother had changed her will?" I asked. He met my eyes. "If she had done so officially, yes." "And did she?" He folded his hands. "Not through this office." Barbara let out a short, exasperated laugh. "Well, maybe she didn't want to go through this office. Maybe she knew you'd pressure her into keeping the old one." Mr. Ellison gave the faintest shrug. "Your mother was not a woman who could be pressured. That, at least, was true. I'll need to check the notarization," he continued, "as well as compare handwriting samples and cross-reference with previous signatures. I may also contact the witnesses listed." Barbara's mouth opened, then closed again. Her fingers gripped the armrest of her chair. Ellison stood. "If you'll all excuse me, I'll retrieve some documentation from the archive. Please remain here." He walked out without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Jane whispered, "Well, that was tense." Barbara glared at her. "This isn't a game," Jane smirked. "Could have fooled me." I stayed silent. My heart was calm, but something in my gut buzzed with unease. The signature, the timing, the sudden confidence from Barbara. It didn't add up. And if there was one thing I'd learned growing up in a house full of quiet judgment and loaded glances, it was this. When something doesn't add up, it usually means someone's lying. I stared at the document on the table, at the shaky curve of my mother's name. Something about it felt like a forgery. And maybe, just maybe, Mr. Ellison already knew that too. When Mr. Ellison returned, he wasn't holding a folder. Instead, in his hand was a small flash drive and a quiet sense of inevitability. Barbara straightened in her seat. Jane tilted her head, curious. Uncle Michael just sighed like a man bracing for weather he'd already seen too many times. "I'd like you all to listen to something," Ellison said calmly, walking to the old laptop on his desk. "This was recorded at the request of your mother during our final meetings." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean recorded?" "She asked me to begin audio recordings of our discussions 6 months ago. She said, and I quote, 'just in case Barbara gets creative.'" The silence was instant, heavy. I didn't move, didn't blink. Barbara gave a short, breathless laugh. "That doesn't sound like her." Ellison didn't respond. He simply inserted the flash drive, clicked twice, and the room filled with the familiar, steady voice of Evelyn Warren. Recording started. Date, March 3rd. "This is Evelyn Warren with my attorney, Gregory Ellison." There was a pause. Then her voice continued, calm and clear. "I want this on record. I have no intention of changing my will. I've reviewed it, I'm satisfied with it, and I trust that it reflects my wishes. My daughter Barbara has mentioned wanting to make adjustments, but I've told her no. If she shows up with new paperwork, she is not telling the truth." Barbara shifted. Her lips parted like she might object, but no sound came out. Ellison clicked again. Recording March 15th. "Evelyn Warren, continuing documentation. I reaffirm that I will not be altering my will. My son Terence understands my intentions. He doesn't need to be reassured. Barbara, on the other hand, I fear she'll try something. She always does." Jane let out a quiet damn under her breath. Michael just shook his head. Ellison clicked again. Recording April 1st. "I've met again with Mr. Ellison to confirm everything remains in order. I have been approached by Barbara multiple times to reconsider, but my answer remains the same. My estate is to be divided equally between my children, no exceptions." The voice ended with the faint sound of a teacup being set down. And then, silence. Barbara looked like someone had turned the oxygen down in the room. Her posture sagged, her fingers curled into fists. "That," she began, then stopped. Ellison turned off the recording. "There are more entries, but I believe those are sufficient for the moment." Barbara stood abruptly. "She must have changed her mind after those. You can't just assume that—" "She passed away less than a month after the last entry," Ellison said evenly. "There are no new documents in our records, and per her instructions I was to be notified of any changes immediately. I received no such notification." "I had witnesses," Barbara snapped. "We'll verify them," Ellison said, his tone steel under velvet. "But so far, there's no evidence that your mother authorized any amendments after the final recording." Barbara turned toward the rest of us, eyes darting, wild. "You all think I forged it, don't you?" No one answered. Jane folded her arms. "You know, Barbara, if it walks like a duck—" "Shut up, Jane," Barbara hissed. Uncle Michael looked at her with weary pity. "You tried to rewrite history, kid. Evelyn was always a step ahead of you." "I didn't forge anything," Barbara shouted, finally losing the mask. "She said she wanted me to have it all. She told me I deserved it." "She may have told you what you wanted to hear," I said quietly. "But what she told Ellison, what she recorded, was the truth." Barbara looked at me like I'd slapped her. "Of course you believe a bunch of tapes. You were never there. You left. You abandoned her." "No," I said. "I respected her. I trusted her to handle her life the way she wanted. You just couldn't accept that you weren't in control." Barbara's chest heaved. Her face was pale now, color drained. She turned to Ellison, grasping at anything. "There has to be something. Some loophole, "There's no loophole," Ellison said, not unkindly. "There's the law. And your mother made herself very clear." He paused. Then, almost gently, "She didn't want you to do this, Barbara." For a moment it looked like she might cry. But no tears came. Just silence. She slowly sank back into her chair, the fight draining from her bones. Ellison looked around the room. With this confirmation, we will proceed with the original will, per Evelyn's explicit and recorded wishes. The contested document will be reviewed by the proper authorities, and the witnesses will be contacted for verification. Barbara didn't respond. Jane leaned closer to me and whispered, "Remind me to record all my family dinners from now on." I almost smiled. For the first time since the funeral, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. Not because I wanted Barbara punished, not even because I'd won, but because the truth had finally spoken, and for once everyone heard it. Ellison closed the laptop, then stood. "If anyone has further concerns, I'll be available to address them individually." Michael rose and clapped a hand on my shoulder. "She'd be proud of you," he said. "She was the one who did all the work," I said. He nodded. That was her way, quiet, sharp, always watching. Barbara still hadn't moved. I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time I saw someone not just manipulative or selfish, but hollow. Like she'd spent her whole life building traps for other people, only to fall into one herself. And Mom had known, not just suspected. She'd planned for this. She knew her daughter, she knew her son, and she made sure the truth wouldn't die with her. For a moment after the recording ended, the room stayed unnaturally still. No one breathed, no one moved. Even the old clock on the wall seemed to hesitate between ticks. Then Uncle Michael broke the silence. "This is fraud," he said, his voice low but shaking. "You tried to steal from your own damn family." Barbara flinched like he'd struck her. "You think this is how Mom raised us?" he went on, stepping toward the table. "You think she'd want her memory dragged through courtrooms and paperwork and faked signatures?" "Michael," Ellison said calmly, "please." "No," Michael snapped. "I'm not staying quiet. I watched Evelyn work her whole life to build something, not just money, but dignity. You nearly threw that in the trash for what? More space? More control?" Barbara's face was blotchy now, her voice trembling. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Jane interrupted. "You almost pulled it off. You came within an inch of stealing everything from all of us. And the only reason you didn't is because Mom knew you well enough to see it coming." Barbara's lips trembled. "I wasn't trying to steal. I thought," she told me. "Oh, don't," Jane said, waving a hand. "Don't do the crying thing now. Not after all this." But the tears came anyway. Whether they were real or not, I couldn't tell. Barbara pressed her palm to her eyes and let out a choked sob. "I was with her every day," she said, her voice cracking. "I was the one who cooked for her, cleaned for her, drove her to appointments. Where were you, Terence? Where were any of you?" Uncle Michael turned away, disgusted. I looked at her, this woman who had been my sister since before I could form full sentences. She was shaking, but there was still something calculated about it. Even now she was performing grief, not feeling it. "She trusted you," I said quietly, "and you used that trust to forge a new will." "I didn't forge it," she said quickly. "I had witnesses. People can be bought," Jane muttered. Barbara's head snapped toward her. "I didn't pay anyone." Ellison's voice cut through the rising voices like a scalpel. "Regardless of intent, I am required by law to report this to the appropriate legal authorities, both the Notary Association and, if necessary, the district attorney." Barbara looked up at him, horror blooming across her face. "You're reporting me?" "I am following your mother's final instructions," he said, "and my legal duty." "I'll lose everything," she whispered. "You were never entitled to everything," I said. That shut her up. Finally. The room felt colder, sharper, like her mask had cracked so hard even she didn't know what face to wear anymore. For a flicker of a second, I felt something close to pity, not for what she did, but for how empty she had to be inside to justify it. And I knew this wasn't the first time she twisted a situation to benefit herself. Mom must have spent years navigating that quiet manipulation. She just hadn't always told me. Ellison began gathering papers into a neat stack. His movements were calm but precise, the kind of calm you use to keep something from splintering further. "I'll notify the executor's office by end of day," he said. "All assets will remain frozen until the investigation is complete." Barbara said nothing. Jane stood first, adjusting her coat. "If you ever want to try that apology tour, Barbara, better start booking stops now. You've got a long list." Uncle Michael followed her out. His expression didn't soften once. I lingered for a moment, watching my sister wipe at her face, waiting for some sign of the woman I used to build blanket forts with in the living room. But she was gone, or maybe she'd never really been there to begin with. Barbara looked up at me, eyes glassy. "You're not going to say anything?" "No," I said. "I've said everything I needed to," and I walked out, letting the door close behind me. The house was quiet, not the kind of quiet that made you uneasy, more like the soft hush after a storm has passed, as if the walls themselves were exhaling. I stood in the front hallway, my fingers brushing against the old light switch Mom never replaced. The wallpaper was still the same, faded roses climbing up toward the ceiling, and the familiar creak in the floorboards greeted me like an old friend as I stepped deeper inside. Barbara wasn't here. For the first time in what felt like years, the house belonged to memory. I wandered into the living room. Dust hung in the slants of evening light, catching on the framed photos that lined the mantel. One of them was of the three of us, Mom, Barbara, and me, all in matching sweaters, pretending to smile for a Christmas card that never got sent. I picked it up and studied it. I must have been 10. Barbara, 12. Mom had one arm around each of us and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd probably just broken up a fight between us before the picture was taken. That would have been typical. She was never the warm and fuzzy type, but she was solid, fair, the kind of mother who believed in hard truths and follow-through. When we messed up, she didn't raise her voice. She gave us chores. When we got it right, she didn't throw parties. She simply nodded and said, "Good, do it again." I hadn't appreciated that growing up, but now I couldn't think of a better legacy. I moved into the kitchen, flipping the kettle on out of habit. The cabinets still held her mismatched mugs, the ones she refused to replace because they all still hold coffee, don't they? I poured a cup and sat at the table, staring out the back window at the garden that had long since gone to weeds. She used to keep it in perfect order, roses along the fence, basil and thyme near the porch. Now it looked wild, overgrown. But somehow, that didn't feel wrong. I took a sip and let the warmth settle into me. The events of the last few days had already started to feel distant, like a story told too many times. Barbara's face when the recording played, Jane's half-shocked, half-satisfied expression, Uncle Michael's outrage, Mr. Ellison's quiet resolve, and me, stuck somewhere between anger, relief, and something close to sorrow. I didn't hate Barbara. That was the strangest part. I didn't even want revenge. I just wanted the truth to win, and it had, because of Mom. She saw what was coming and made sure the pieces were in place, not out of spite, not to punish Barbara, but to protect something bigger, her voice, her values, her belief in fairness. Even after death, she stayed in control, not because she didn't trust us, but because she knew us too well. I walked upstairs and stepped into her room. The bed was still neatly made, as if she might come back tonight and expect things in order. Her bookshelf stood just as she'd left it. Cookbooks next to gardening guides, mystery novels beside tax records, practical, predictable, so completely her. On the nightstand sat a photo of me, from college graduation. I hadn't known she kept it there. I sat on the edge of the bed, the silence wrapping around me like a blanket, and I let the grief come, not sharp, not loud, just a deep, steady ache that filled every corner. She was gone, but her intentions weren't. Her voice, her choices, her trust, they all remained. I stood and took one last look around the room before heading downstairs again. The house wouldn't be mine alone. Per the will, her real will, Barbara and I would share it, along with everything else. Whether Barbara would ever step foot in it again was another question entirely. Maybe she would, maybe not. Either way, Mom's voice had spoken, loud and clear. And in that, I found peace. As I locked up and stepped back into the fading light of evening, I looked once more at the quiet street, the old trees, the porch where I'd once sat with scraped knees and a popsicle. The storm had passed, and I knew, with quiet certainty, the last line that would stay with me long after the paperwork was done and the lawyers went home. She knew Barbara, and she knew me. That's why she made sure the truth would speak, even when she no longer could.